everyone, I'm Kate. This is the baby, and I run the main Fiddle Camp kitchen. For those of you who don't already know me, I'm going to talk about sourdough bread. We've been making sourdough bread in the main Fiddle Camp kitchen for years, and the star of the show is this little substance here in this jar. This is Henrietta. She was given to us by Tamara Goltz, who teaches fiddle at main Fiddle Camp. And this is a sourdough starter, and this is the magic. Basically, this is a slurry of flour, water, wild yeast, and bacteria that has been captured from the air. It lives in the refrigerator most of the time, and I take it out every so often to feed it, to keep it alive, or when I want to use it, I'll also feed it. So I'm going to walk us through the process from start to finish of how to feed a sourdough starter, all the way up through making a beautiful loaf of no-knead bread. So I'll start by emptying it into this bowl, and you can kind of get a sense of what the consistency of it is. It's like a thick yogurt almost. I'm going to add water first because it's easier to mix, and this is lukewarm water, and I'm basically trying to double roughly the amount of sourdough starter by adding flour and water. So I'll mix that water in, and to this liquid I'm going to add unbleached white flour, all-purpose flour. And again, you can see I'm not measuring here, I'm just sort of like adding a bit. I'll mix it until I find roughly the consistency that I'm looking for, which is about this. And then the most important part of the feeding is I'm going to replace some of the sourdough starter back into the jar so I can save it for subsequent batches. Don't forget to do that. You'll be really sad if you use all of your sourdough starter in a loaf of bread. Then you won't have any left for the next one. I'll cover this bowl and I'll just leave it out overnight. The yeast and bacteria that exist in the starter will eat their way through the flour and ultimately become reactivated and will be ready to use in a loaf of bread. So it's about 12 hours later. My sourdough starter is ripe, and I know that it's ripe because it is actively frothing and bubbling. It's so beautiful. So now I'm ready to make bread. I start by adding about a tablespoon of salt to approximately 2 cups of sourdough starter, and this is for 1 loaf of bread. So that's about a tablespoon. Mix that in. This is whole wheat flour that was grown right here in Maine. I'll add a wallop of that. After I add enough wheat flour, I end up with this gloppy, wet mess. And so from here on out, I'm going to add sprinkles of all-purpose flour until I get it right to the texture where I want it. I'm trying to get to a consistency where the dough doesn't stick to my fingers and pulls away from the side of the bowl. And I'm adding flour very slowly because I don't want to add too much. If you add too much, you'll end up with a loaf that's very stiff and unworkable. You can always fix that by adding a little bit more water, but it's kind of a pain. So I'm really just adding small sprinkles of flour until I end up with a mass of dough that looks somewhat like this. Still a little bit sticky, but you see how it pulls away from my fingers. It doesn't stick to the countertop. The dough will continue to absorb the flour as you handle it, so you're going to have to add pinches of flour. Because this is a no-knead bread, once I get it to the consistency where I want it, I'm basically done. I'll flour this bowl. I'll flour the surface of the dough. And then I'll let it rise for about 6 hours. The next step in this process is shaping the bread. So I'm going to take this risen bread, or this risen dough, out of the bowl. Oh, look at this. It's just gorgeous. And I'm going to add a little bit of flour to my hands. And then I'm just going to take the edges of the dough and roll them in on top of themselves. So it's as simple as that. Take some flour, flour the inside of my basket. You're going to want to give a good amount of flour here so that the dough doesn't stick to the basket when you try to dump it out into the hot Dutch oven, which you'll see later. And then I simply take my shaped dough, put it upside down in the basket, cover it with a towel, and let it sit for another 4 hours. So my bread has been shaped and now it is ready to go into the oven. The dough is in this basket. It's fully risen. My oven has been preheating at 450 degrees with the Dutch oven inside, so this Dutch oven is incredibly hot right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully dump the dough while maintaining the shape into the Dutch oven. I'll use this knife to score the bread, so I'll slash the loaf 3 times across the top, and that gives the loaf room to expand as it rises more in the hot oven. And then I'll bake the bread covered for 20 minutes at about 400 degrees. And then I'll uncover the loaf, continue baking until it's done. I know that the bread is done either by tapping on it. When you tap on it, it'll make a really hollow sound. Or you can use a kitchen thermometer, and when the internal temperature measures about 190 degrees, you're good to go. So here it is, the loaf of sourdough bread. I'll leave it on this rack to cool for the next few hours, and then I'll bag it up and eat it with some butter or whatever. So don't forget to tune in to the Maestro Bistro, and I will be on hand to answer any questions that you might have about this process. Thanks for watching.